Now, what more could be said about Dragonite that hasn't been said already? My most vivid memory of Dragonite is Lance's army of them in Gen 1, and at the time, having no idea what was super effective against his team. Rolling into battle with Dragon-type moves was pretty rare because there were hardly any, or even having an Ice-type move was kind of rare, because I never seemed to account for that. And it meant that he was always more of a roadblock than Blue was. In Gen 2, however, the Dragon scales were balanced, with Dragonite earning a Rock and 4-time Ice weakness because it was flying. Despite that, it's still an extremely solid Pokemon, with a base stat total of 600. It's got a pretty even spread of stats with a focus on its physical attacking damage, but despite that high physical attacking stat, there's nothing we can really exploit with it, due to most of Dragonite's coverage relying on its special attacking stat. But before we dig into Dragonite's moves, let's take a look at the rules. Rule number 1 is we can only use Dragonite in battle, but we can capture other Pokemon for HM butler purposes. Number 2 is we can't use items in battle, but held items are fine. And number 3 is a minimum battles run is defined as only battling trainers / engaging in encounters that prohibit us from progressing the game. I've marked them all in the spreadsheet in the description. Dragonite's learn set leaves a lot to be desired. While it does have the invaluable Thunder Wave ability from the get-go, moves like Twister, Dragon Rage, Slam and the rest arrive at a point too late in the game to make a difference and are way outclassed by the TMs that we can learn. TM wise, Dragonite has pretty excellent all-round coverage, but as I said before, its lower special stat, when compared to other Pokemon of its kind anyway, means we can't rely on it too heavily. However, with the ability to learn the elemental punches and a large pool of elemental moves to learn from, it means we can mold Dragonite to fit some of the more difficult encounters. With that said, like with my Entei run, there's a TM that Dragonite learns that ended up making this run possible, and I'm not going to say what that move is until we get to the battle with Red. Suffice to say, I had no idea that I'd be using it, so take a guess and see if you're right by the end. With the preamble done, we can finally start the game. As with my other runs, after I insert Dragonite, this time in place of Totodile for no real reason, I give my Dragonite some perfect IVs. Constantly resetting is just too much of a chore, and we need all the help that we can get in these runs. Dragonite starts off with Wrap, Lair, Thunder Wave and Twister, and we're not in the Gen 1 era where we could combo Wrap and Agility to basically stun lock our opponents. Not that there'd be any fun in that anyway. We deal with all the usual early game shenanigans, heading to Mr. Pokemon, and then on our way back we face the rival. Not too much to say about him, there rarely ever is. I paralyze the Chikorita and then wail on it with Twister until it's KO'd. Going forward, in most cases, Dragonite has an answer to the major battles standing in its way. It's got great coverage and those elemental punches can come in clutch. Our biggest stumbling block is when we come up against its weaknesses, especially its double weakness to Ice, but on looking forwards, you don't really face that many Ice-type or Dragon Pokemon. Anyway, first up we've got Falkner. Like the other legendary / pseudo-legendary Pokemon, we're on a slower XP curve, meaning that by the end of the game, we're going to be pushing the early 60s if we're lucky. For now, Falkner hasn't really got an answer to any of our questions. We've got Thunder Wave, which we'll use against the Pidgey, then we'll just focus on Twister to finish it off. The same applies to Falkner's Pidgeotto, and it makes for a first strike victory. I'm not expecting Bugsy to put up much of a fight surely either, but as with all these runs, there's one thing in the back of my mind, and that is Miltank and Rollout. Fear it, run from it, but Miltank is always there in the shadows with Rollout. We carry on to Azalea Town to deal with the Rocket / Slowpoke well portion of the story, no surprises here. Instead of facing the rival, I decided to get the extra XP that I can from Bugsy's gym, and ultimately the gym leader himself. Upon first trying, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. While Dragonite does resist Bug, our level isn't great and Scyther is still quick with access to moves like Quick Attack. Against the Metapod, we of course start with Thunder Wave and then move on to Twister. Instead of Weedle, we get Scyther next. Doesn't matter, as the plan was always going to be popping off a Thunder Wave first. When we use Twister, it may be doing about 1/7 of damage to Scyther, which means that things could get dragged out. But even as we're plugging away with Twister, Scyther's not paralysed every turn, and its quick attacks are dealing a fair bit of damage. Despite getting quite close to victory, we're just not at a level where it's reliable and we're eventually knocked out. I don't bother spinning the dice against Bugsy and instead decide to take on the rival. We're still a few levels behind his Pokemon, but there's not too much to be scared about. For the level 12 Ghastly, we go the old Thunderwave Twister route. Then, when it's swiftly defeated, we don't see the usual Meganium out next, but Zubat instead, which works in our favour. Of course, the same rules apply to Zubat, and it's not long before it's down too. For Meganium, there's not a whole lot it can do. While it does use Reflect because Twister is a special move, it's not really helping it out. Plus, when we start using Twister, I'm reminded that the move can actually flinch, though it seems to be a pretty rare occurrence. Even though Meganium has 3 levels on us and is quite bulky, we can still hammer away with Twister until it's defeated. And after all that, while we've only gained 1 level, it should be enough to provide more of an advantage against Bugsy and his Scyther. Back to the gym we go. This time we start with the usual to take care of the Metapod. Then when Scyther's out, our Twister is doing just that little bit more damage to Scyther now, allowing us to continue chipping away at its health. It's not long before it goes down and Bugsy unleashes the fury of Kakuna. Not long before that bug's squashed too. With all that said and done, we of course have Whitney next. With our chances of gathering more XP before the fight are quite limited, there are 2 trainers underground who you eventually have to fight when doing the Goldenrod Radio Tower story later on in the game, and the trainer in a gym. There's actually no one else around. Even if you were to travel all the way north to where Sudowoodo is, there's never a single battle that you have to take. What all that means is that when we eventually reach Whitney, our Dragonite is level 16. Our moveset is yet to change as there's nothing either available or purchasable that's going to work in our favour just yet. The first time in, the if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach of Thunderwave Twister is enough to carry us through the Clefairy. However, as you might have guessed, we've got a problem on the horizon. Miltank and its super effective rollout. Flashbacks of my Entei and Suicune runs. But those Pokemon didn't have access to Thunderwave. Even though rollout is super effective, and despite Twister not really being that effective from our side, it's just not Miltank's day. Despite trying its best to move, the paralysis just keeps proccing, leaving Miltank as nothing more than a punching bag for us. In the end, Whitney is a first try victory. Northward we go, hoping our luck will hold out when it comes to the Burn Tower rival battle. At level 17 now, we of course get hit with Curse straight off the bat. No points for guessing what happens next. At this rate, the battle is a wash and it makes more sense to gain some levels before trying this again, which means a visit to the Kimono Sisters to start beating us some cats. Then at level 20, I head back to the rival. Like most instances, unless you're both quicker and have an effective move against the Haunter, you're often resetting a lot from having been cursed. In between these resets, however, I do decide to teach Dragonite its first elemental punch, Fire Punch, mainly to deal with the Meganium and Magnemite. In a successful battle, we want to use Thunderwave first and then pray that Haunter is paralyzed next turn. It is, and then when we use Twister, we get a flinch. We then switch to a Fire Punch and Haunter thankfully uses Lick to leave us on a nice bit of HP. With one final Fire Punch, it's down and Magnemite comes out next. This is why we have Fire Punch and it's able to take the little Magnemite down. For Zubat, we play it safe with Thunderwave because its Supersonic can become pretty annoying. A few Fiery Punches is enough to take that down too. Then when Bayleaf pops out, even though Fire Punch isn't doing as much damage as I'd like and we get poisoned, it's still an easy enough victory. Next up is Morty, and we don't particularly have an effective move against Ghost Pokemon. Either way, we can rely on Fire Punch to deal with the scrubs on the way to the gym leader himself, which doesn't cause us too much of a problem. On the journey towards Morty, we have actually learned a move for Dragonite that will be somewhat useful in a very short time, Dragon Rage. For Ghastly, I go for Fire Punch first and it gets oh so close to knocking it out. Thankfully, the Lick that we receive doesn't paralyze us and we can take it down. When the Haunter appears, I do go for another Fire Punch, hoping it'll do more than half and Haunter will retaliate with anything but Hypnosis. When it goes for Nightshade, it's fate sealed. At level 24 and a decent amount of HP, we get Gengar. Straight off the bat, it's faster than us and thankfully we dodge the Hypnosis and retaliate with Thunderwave. Anticipating its bulk, this is where Dragon Rage comes in. The flat 40 damage is enough to take Gengar over the half HP mark, and as long as we're not put to sleep, we should have this. For some reason, we get a mean luck, which is fine by me, and we hit it with another Dragon Rage. Onto Haunter. We line up another Fire Punch. Haunter answers with another pointless mean luck, and it's all over. Pretty smooth sailing so far. Next up, of course, we're climbing the lighthouse and then sailing over to Cyanwood. I'm not too worried about Chuck because we can learn Thunder Punch if needed. At level 27, we're facing off with the gym leader. We're still, of course, making full use of Thunder Wave to paralyze Primate the first chance we get. While it goes for Clair, we follow up with the Dragon Rage, which thankfully takes it past half HP. We're on the receiving end of an ineffective Karate Chop before we KO Primate with another Dragon Rage. For Poliwrath, we're going to paralyze it first, thankfully dodge the Hypnosis, and then start hitting it with Dragon Rage. While Poliwrath does use Lock On, which means a Dynamic Punch is coming, I'm not too worried. Dynamic Punch is not effective, and even though we're confused, we get off another Dragon Rage, which means the battle is over. Another first try victory. Dragonite is absolutely breezing through all the challenges in its way. We're soon back in Olivine, which means that Jasmine is up next. While we do still have Fire Punch, her Steelix does no Rock Throw, which could mean we're in for a bad time. The first time round, Fire Punch is enough to KO Magnemite, but when the Steelix comes out, our Fire Punch is doing less than half, which means Jasmine will, at some point, be using a Hyper Potion. While Steelix doesn't go for Rock Throw, it starts using Iron Tail, which is doing some pretty hefty damage to us. Not only that, we get our defense dropped on the second. As expected, we see the Hyper Potion, but immediately after that, our Fire Punch crits, and our speed means we get to pop off 2 and defeat Steelix. At 10 HP, we're through to Jasmine's final Magnemite. The battle is all but over, and of course, just one Fire Punch is easily able to one-shot the Magnemite. Not too shabby. Of course, we're now at the point in the story where the Rocket Hideout and Lake of Rage awaits, riveting stuff that we can thankfully just pass right over. By the time we're ready to face Pryce, our Dragonite is now level 31. I ended up teaching it Headbutt, which was more to deal with the annoying Rocket Pokemon than Pryce himself. It does decent enough damage against Seal, but with Pryce's icy moves, we could be in for a bad time. We, of course, get hit with Icy Wind, doing decent damage and lowering our speed. Despite eventually KOing the Seal, Dugong comes out, and our speed drop means that Dugong can use Aurora Beam and take us down to 20 HP, and you can probably see where this is going. Even a crit Headbutt can't save us, and we're KO'd. Second time around, I teach Dragonite Thunder Punch. It's just shy of knocking out Seal, but when it retaliates with Icy Wind, we don't get the speed drop this time. After it's knocked out, we get the Dugong. Thankfully, we can go first with Thunder Punch, and while not a KO, it takes it past half health, which is good enough for now. Aurora Beam takes us down to 15 HP, things are looking pretty grim, but one more Thunder Punch and we're on to Piloswine. Obviously, Piloswine has Blizzard and other moves that can easily KO Dragonite. Instead of Thunder Punch, we switch to Fire Punch, which does a fair chunk of Piloswine's HP. It then goes for Blizzard and gets the miss, lucky for us. We then see the Hyper Potion, but thanks to our speed not being dropped, Piloswine's fate is sealed, leaving us to simply use 2 Fire Punches to finish it off. Of course, now we have to clear the radio tower in Goldenrod before we can finally proceed through the Icy Cave and to the other end to Blackthorn and Clair. We have Ice Punch in our back pocket for just such an occasion, but we definitely can't go into the battle underestimating Clair. We of course teach Dragonite Ice Punch as soon as we enter the gym, which allows us to scythe through the waves of Dragon type Pokemon before us. When we're eventually at the Dragon Queen herself, Dragonite is level 41. Ice Punch against the Dragonair is not only super effective, but a one-shot. While I'm used to seeing Kingdra come next, Clair instead sends out her other Dragonair. It's dealt with in much the same way, and the same is true for a third and final Dragonair. No chance we're getting paralysed by them in this room. As many people found out the first time they faced Kingdra in this gem, it's only weak to Dragon type moves, and we of course have none of them. That would matter anyway. So we're stuck with what we've got. Even though we crit with Ice Punch, our damage output is clearly pretty lacking and the Kingdra gets off a smokescreen. After Clair uses a Hyper Potion, we hit Kingdra with a Thunder Punch, maybe doing about quarter damage, but getting the paralysis off in the process. We then end up missing with our next move, only for Kingdra to use Dragon Breath, which does about 1/3. We then miss again, leaving Kingdra to use another Dragon Breath and take us down to 34 HP. While our next Ice Punch does finally hit, leaving Kingdra within range of a next move KO, we get hit with a third and final Dragon Breath, knocking us out. Not a bad first match, and there's certainly light at the end of the tunnel here. While it does take a couple of more tries to get into a favourable position, it's a far cry from some of the nonsense I've had to endure in other runs. As it always is, all her 3 Dragonairs take is 1 Ice Punch each. Then for Kingdra, we go straight for Thunder Wave and then get hit with a Smokescreen. Next, when we use Ice Punch, it doesn't miss, but we do take a Dragon Breath in return. Our next Ice Punch then doesn't miss, but Kingdra is within healing range for Clair. For the remainder of the battle, even though we're missing a couple of times, thanks to Kingdra being paralysed, we're able to keep plugging away with Ice Punch until Clair and it are defeated. Next up, we have the Elite Four. The main thing in my mind was having enough of our elemental punches stocked so that we could switch up our tactics between battles. While we are at a decent enough level, 43, when we're first tackling the Elite Four, we're outfitted with Thunder and Ice Punch, as well as the old faithful Thunder Wave and Headbutt. Our first go at Will isn't great. We have Ice Punch, which can easily deal with Xatu, but it's the Jinx that becomes the roadblock. Its Ice Punch is pretty devastating against Dragonite, leaving us on just 10 HP. And while we are able to KO the Jinx, there's no way we're surviving the rest of Will's Pokemon. Even when we teach Fire Punch to Dragonite, it's still not enough to one-shot Jinx, and we can't just be taking an Ice Punch from it. This is where we see how that lack of special, comparatively speaking, is leaving us just a little short. However, there's always the power of friendship to rely on. When we've taught Dragonite Return, that's enough for us to get the one-shot on Jinx. The rest of Will's Pokemon, while no pushovers, are a lot easier to defeat and the battle becomes pretty smooth afterwards. For Koga, I at first rolled in with Thunder Punch instead of Fire Punch. The battle was just too unreliable without it, so I ended up relying on Fire and Ice Punch, Thunder Wave and Return. Again, the not so great special attack does prevent us from one-shotting a number of Koga's Pokemon, such as the Ariados, but they tend to stick to evasion boosting moves, which means we can avoid taking damage. Fortress goes down with just 1 Fire Punch. Muck, however, is pretty annoying. With an MO of using Toxic and Minimize, we're struggling to hit it. And with the tick damage of Toxic building up, even when we do defeat it and head through to Crobat, the battle ends rather swiftly. As you might expect, we're relying on a bit of luck to see us through. While the plan doesn't change for Ariados and Fortress, it's best just to stick with Return for Muck because it does over half damage, and then hope you get a Minimize that you can then hit rather than Toxic. For Crobat, we lean on Ice Punch, which is going to be a 2-shot. Despite that, it's boosting its evasion and then getting off Toxic, only for Koga to heal Crobat. However, we soon get off a Clutch Freeze, which Koga answers with a full heal, maybe around full restores. Either way, even though we're poisoned, we get through to Venomoth. A couple of Fire Punches and tanking a Psychic allows us to get through his final Pokemon. Next up, we have Bruno. The slightly frustrating aspect of this battle is that you really need to teach Dragonite Fly so that you have a chance at victory and to make it consistent. For Hitmontop, Return is more than enough to KO in 2 hits. Onix, as you can imagine, has no reply to an Ice Punch. Hitmonchan will of course try to hit us with Ice Punch, but we can fly up to mitigate that. Machamp would be a 2-shot with Fly, but we're lucky and end up getting a crit. We've not got that to worry about with this final Pokemon Hitmonlee, however, as that'll go down to just 1 Fly. Karen is a bit meh. Because of our lack of anything effective, we're mostly relying on Fly to do the heavy lifting. The most important thing is that it's doing over half damage, which it does to Umbreon and lets us avoid a Sand attack. Gengar's out next, and after using Fly, the enemy Gengar is in red bar. All it takes then is a single Ice Punch. Murkrow is of course weak to Ice and goes down in just 1. For Houndoom, again, nothing effective, but a couple of returns is enough. Karen's final Pokemon, Vileplume, we have Fly. Vileplume is pretty weak defensively, so that ends the battle. Finally, we have Lance standing in our way, and given how most encounters go with Lance, I was expecting this one to be no different, resulting in a lot of trial and error. We have the same moveset we've had since facing Bruno, Fly, Ice Punch, Thunder Wave and Return, and I have the Never Melt Ice equipped for that extra boost. I did contemplate teaching Dragonite Thunder Punch for the Gyarados, but experience had me erring on the side of Gyarados always going for Rain Dance its first turn. As expected, after Return takes it down past half HP, it uses Rain Dance, which allows us to knock it out. Aerodactyl, as always, has the potential to be a pain. Of course, it's quicker than us and it uses Rock Slide. But while doing some decent damage, we don't get flinched. When we follow up with Ice Punch, it's just not a one-shot. We have to tank another Rock Slide, leaving us on just 28 HP. And while Aerodactyl's fate is pretty much sealed with another Ice Punch, our fate may be sealed too. On the first level 47 Dragonite, we get off an Ice Punch and it's a crit, knocking it out, but I don't know if the damage of a normal Ice Punch is going to be enough. However, on the very next Dragonite, it turns out that we can make the range without relying on the crit. Leveling up to 48, we have Charizard up next. I go for a return as it's the most effective move we have. While it takes Charizard past half HP, there's no chance we're surviving what's next, especially if it's a Hyper Beam. But if that Hyper Beam misses, but surely when it comes to level 50 Dragonite, there's no way we're knocking this thing out and surviving a hit. Well, I guess we are. Who knew Ice Punch would make the range? Either way, we've just beaten Lance on our very first try. Not bad at all. Dragonite's certainly proving why it's still a pretty dominant Pokemon to this day, even if its moveset in this gen is a little more undesirable than in later games. But there's still the Kanto hill to climb. While I don't choose to go in any particular order in Kanto, I felt it did make sense to hit the easier gym leaders first, starting with Misty. After Lance, we're now at level 51. Of course, Thunder Punch has had to make a return, and it easily wipes out Misty's first Pokemon, the Golduck. And while I wasn't expecting Dragonite to one-shot the Lapras, we do take it past half HP. Thankfully, Lapras's Blizzard then misses, which lets us get the KO. As has been the story for most of this run, we're just a little shy of knocking out Misty's Starmie with Thunder Punch, and it does end up confusing us, but it's all good as we pop off another Thunder Punch, leaving us with the Quagsire. Not much to say about this Pokemon either, as Return makes quick work of it. I next decide to take on Erica in Celadon. We've still got Ice Punch and I can simply lean on it to decimate her team in one hit, aside from the bulky Blossom. We set our sights on Janine, and while we lack a super effective move against a team, their pathetic levels combined with a healthy hammering of Return takes care of her pretty quickly. Because we still have Ice Punch, I go for Brock next. It's the same story as Erica, swapping out our Thunder Punch for an Ice Punch every so often. With Blaine, things are a little more finicky, with the Macargo being the biggest annoyance because of Curse. However, in the end, Blaine falls just like the rest. And I just remembered that I ended up defeating Surge first of all, which means we've only got 2 more trainers left. Blue, as always, is a different beast. We're a level below his Pidgeot, but we should have enough coverage with our moves to make it past his team. In our very first battle, we hit Pidgeot with a Thunder Punch, which takes it pretty close to a KO. We get Mirror Move in return, pathetic, and then finish it off. Rhydon can put the hurt on us potentially. We go for Ice Punch and then get Deruded. No biggie as we quickly take it out. When Gyarados comes out, of course, we're already lining up a Thunder Punch, and that'll be a one-shot. Not doing too shabby. Alakazam's pretty weak defensively, so one return should, not great. If Sandstorm wasn't doing as much chip damage to us, half our HP, then maybe we could have survived that. Our next few battles with Blue, we're losing out mainly to his Arcanine. Because our return isn't regularly doing half HP, we're often putting it in healing range, and then, even with leftovers equipped, the ability for the Arcanine to shave off our HP means that if the dog itself doesn't KO us, then the Mighty Executor ends up doing it instead. But this doesn't last for too long, fortunately. In a successful battle, we're still starting off with Thunder Punch on Pidgeot, and it's even better when we get a crit. What's even better is when we use Ice Punch on Rhydon, and although it doesn't KO it, we get a freeze. We get past 2 Pokemon without taking any damage, and then have a Gyarados to contend with that will go down to just 1 Thunder Punch. Or I guess not this time. Anyway, Gyarados uses Rain Dance, so it doesn't matter and we knock it out anyway. Or we don't because Blue then uses a full restore, but we do the next time because, oh, full restore again, but I guess that means he won't have any for Arcanine at least. We eventually KO the Gyarados and Alakazam is sent out. It's still quicker than us and annoyingly gets off a Reflect before we can hit it with Return. Instead of using Psychic, Alakazam next goes for Disable, which misses and lets us take it out. Though we are in a good position, that Reflect isn't doing us any favours and deals rather pathetic damage to Arcanine. Either way, with leftovers and no full restores, Arcanine is a lot more cooperative this time. So, after a few returns, we're left with just Executor, and it's not a problem that Ice Punch can't quickly fix. So with Blue defeated, that means we've just got Red left. When thinking about the battle, we should be in a decent position. We have the elemental punches and in a pinch could probably pick up the more powerful TMs if we're left with no other choice. Though I have no intention of gambling in the casino for hours on end, we maybe could get away with just straight up buying the coins needed. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. As always, I give things a whirl at level 56 without having used any rare candy just yet. Even when we're hit by Charm, Return does pretty decent damage. However, even though Thunder is neutral damage to Dragonite, it's still doing way more than I'd like and doesn't bode well for the rest of the battle. In any case, once we're beyond the Pikachu, Blastoise is of course up next. Why? Because Blastoise has Blizzard, and Blizzard is a one-shot. No ifs or buts about that. Even after using my rare candy to take Dragonite to level 61 and at full health, Blizzard is still a one-shot, and it's always going to be a one-shot. So our dilemma is clear. We have no choice but to find some way to knock Blastoise out in one hit or hope the thing gets paralysed. Even in the instances when Blizzard either misses or Blastoise is paralysed, we're not great at outputting damage. There's that weaker special again. Because a move like Thunder Punch is maybe doing about a quarter damage, it soon becomes clear after maybe a dozen tries that hitting and hoping with a combo of Thunder Punch and Thunder Wave isn't a visible way forward. There's just too much hanging on luck. Again and again I try with this strat, and in one instance I'm actually able to make it past Blastoise with a healthy dose of luck. Red then sends out his Espeon. While it's obviously faster and gets off a Psychic, it doesn't take us past half HP. So there still might be light at the end of the tunnel. We then hit it with a Thunder Wave because why not? Then, because of the speed drop associated with Thunder Wave, the next turn we can go first with Return, which results in a one-shot when it's crit. We get Snorlax right after, and I have no illusions that we can down this thing in one. We'll definitely outspeed, so Thunder Wave is a good first attack. Then, when Snorlax uses Amnesia, I go for Return. It does maybe a quarter, which is pretty impressive, all things considered. But when we get hit with Body Slam, it's pretty evident that unless Snorlax is going to get paralysed, we won't be surviving too long. Another round and Snorlax is thankfully paralysed while we get off a Return. However, if it manages to move next round, it's probably going to go with Rest. I go for Ice Punch, thinking I could just get it over the edge, but it does extremely pathetic damage. Not only that, when we next follow up with Return, Snorlax has a slither of health. It's only by the grace of paralysis that we're actually able to defeat it. Charizard's next. It was a toss-up whether Dragonite would outspeed, and turns out that it doesn't. While Flamethrower doesn't do too much damage, Charizard gets lucky and procs a burn, and there's no way that we can heal out of it, so we're stuck with the lowered attack. I'm thinking with the burns adding up, there's no way that Charizard isn't going to finish us off, but we somehow managed to keep powering through. Charizard being paralysed and us using Thunder Punch to somehow defeat it. Crazy luck has taken us this far, and we've only got the Venusaur left. Maybe we could make it through it. For Venusaur, I immediately go for Ice Punch because we need to put this thing down, but the move doesn't quite push Venusaur over the halfway mark. It then preps Solar Beam, so unless we get a crit, this isn't happening. I go for Thunder Wave, hoping it'll get paralysed next turn. We then go for Ice Punch. We don't get the crit. We're on 27 HP. Then Burn kicks in, and we are toast. Really, really close. We had a crazy confluence of luck, so lucky in fact that it ended up being a feat Dragonite was unable to perform again. I would go on to battle for another 30 minutes in the hopes of getting a similar streak. It wasn't happening. At one point I tried to combo Thunder Wave with Dynamic Punch, but Blastoise just kept on hitting those blizzards. It was relentless. The best I managed to get was reaching the Snorlax once again, but that only ended in defeat. That little light of hope for Thunder Wave strats has just been extinguished. We need to find a new way forward. I checked up via a damage calculator if there was any move that could successfully one-shot or even two-shot Blastoise. Even if I had Thunder, and even if I could boost its damage, it just wasn't happening, and we absolutely had to get past the Blastoise. So if the most powerful Thunder move in the game wasn't able to do it, was there anything that could one-shot or in a pinch two-shot Blastoise? Well, technically there is. And I'm not talking about curse strats, because we'd end up being slower than Blastoise if we went down that route, and we need that speed to finish off Blastoise before it can get to us. Way back at the start of this run, I mentioned a move that could accomplish that. Any guesses? If you guessed Fury Cutter, then you'd be correct. Yes, a move that after obtaining it from Bugsy most people do not use, or if they do, they get rid of it pretty quickly, was actually the key to unlocking this battle. Why can Dragonite learn the move? Who knows? At this point, who cares? I'll take what I can get. Fury Cutter starts with a base power of 10. Every time it's used successfully, its power will double, up to a maximum of 160, which is 5 consecutive turns. If Fury Cutter misses, the user is switched out, or the player uses an item, the power will reset to normal. Thanks Bulbapedia for that. So, because a Pokemon like Pikachu, which always comes out first, is not weak to Fury Cutter, and Red will heal Pikachu, it allows us to use that Pokemon to set up on. Then, when Fury Cutter is able to down Pikachu in one, it means it'll be powerful enough to two-shot Blastoise. If Blastoise misses with Blizzard, and Blizzard has 70% accuracy, so it's technically possible more often than you think. Now, obviously, this is not a foolproof strategy. It does rely firstly on Pikachu playing Ball, and by playing Ball we mean that Pikachu has to miss or not use Charm at all, which it'll go for on the first turn most of the time. Not only that, we want Pikachu to be using and missing with Thunder. Then we need to get into a cadence where our Fury Cutters are taking it to low health but not defeating it. This is because we need to heal with leftovers the damage that we've been taking, and we can get into several rounds of healing while Red is healing his Pikachu. If all that goes to plan, then when Blastoise comes out, we can use and not miss with Fury Cutter to take it out in 2. Then, in theory, the rest of his team should follow with a little less difficulty. With that plan in mind, I started battling Red, and though it certainly took a few battles to get everything to align, it finally happens. Pikachu's obviously first, and we start the battle by immediately getting hit with Thunder. While it does about 1/4 damage, we don't get paralyzed, so that's nice at least. We retaliate with Fury Cutter, and we're just going to keep using this during the battle and hope to fall into that golden zone. Pikachu ends up missing quite a few Thunders, a little too many in fact, and it turns out that our Fury Cutters are doing more damage than I'd like. In the end, we actually defeat Pikachu faster than I would have liked. So when Blastoise comes out, it absolutely has to miss with Blizzard or we're toast. Well, the opposite of toast, frozen. Fury Cutter does well over half as expected, and we get the Blizzard miss. Not only that, we've also healed from our leftovers to near full health. We then unleash Fury Cutter on Blastoise, knocking it out. The other advantage from building up those Fury Cutters is that Espeon is weak to them. So when it comes out, even though it's quicker than us and pops off a Psychic, when we hit with a Fury Cutter, it's easily able to knock it out. I wasn't sure which Mon Red would send out next, but it's Snorlax. It could go either way, because if it uses Body Slam and we take a ton of damage and get paralyzed, that's not a recipe for a good time. However, when we attack with Fury Cutter, which does just over half the Snorlax, it then uses Amnesia to raise its special defense, fine by us, and we can keep on using Fury Cutter. For Charizard, I end up taking a moment to think. It's a toss-up between Fury Cutter and Thunder Punch, with the former not being too effective. In the end, because of Charizard's speed, I go with Thunder Wave to paralyze it, but it then gets off a flamethrower first. It's not super effective, and we thankfully don't get the burn. I then, for some reason, go with Return, which doesn't even do half damage to Charizard. I then still go with Return, and I'm still not sure why. Either way, we're on 56 HP and really cutting things close. We do, however, end up knocking it out, leaving Red's final Pokemon, Venusaur. We're on a nice amount of HP once again. Unsure of how much Solar Beam will do, I immediately go for Thunder Wave. Venusaur takes in Sunlight. I go for Fury Cutter again. For some reason, it does pathetic damage. Thankfully, Solar Beam is also pretty pathetic too. Sticking to Return, even though its damage isn't fantastic, it still ends up being the best path forward, and we even proc a Paralysis. In just a few more turns, we use a final Return and end the battle. Well, not too bad a run. Dragonite did tend to breeze through most of the battles, and it's easy to see why it has such a great long-lasting reputation. Never did I think I'd be breaking out Fury Cutter in the final battle with Red, but it's those kind of strats that make these types of runs so interesting. But hey, maybe you could have made the run even easier. Feel free to let me know, and I've also included a list of all the trainers I fought and their locations in the description if you're interested. If you have an idea for an interesting run in the same style, let me know, and if you want to like or subscribe, go for it. Until next time, have a good one.